I've been asked about builds I use a lot. Even though they're nothing special, I figured I'd throw them all into one video so that they're all in one spot, and I'll try and make individual videos for the other builds I use in the future too. But to start, we have my level 80 strength build. It's at a plus 16 plus 6 upgrade level, starting as a vagabond. This is my main invasion account, as I like fights around level 80. I find them just more enjoyable than the higher metas. I've split my priorities between strength and vigor, with just enough endurance to hold my heaviest weapon with the armor I want, and just enough dexterity to wield the Great Ape, which is my highest dexterity requirement weapon. For talismans, I'm forced into using the Great Jars if I want to be on medium load, and for a similar reason I'm forced into the Erdtree's favour. For the other two, I usually rock the Crimson Amber Medallion or switch it out to the Blessed Dew Talisman if I get damaged and don't want to heal immediately, just because it's such a massive health boost. And this slot I usually switch around depending on what I have at the time. Usually it's the Spear Talisman, but I'll go to the Arrow Sting if I'm using the Cannon, or the Shard if I'm using a weapon for its Ash of War or something like that. So this one's pretty flexible. Like, these are very useful in just momentarily changing my stats so I can use something that I wouldn't otherwise, and that's what that free slot is usually used for. Obviously, my armor is the Banished Knights and Veterans Gauntlets, giving me that magic 61 poise breakpoint, and I make sure to keep a variety of consumables in my inventory. Though I have recently run out of materials to replenish them, so I will need to go on a farming run at some point, but usually there's not much more to it than that. I make sure I have a lot of both of these for if I want to use me the jar cannon, but otherwise my armory is fairly light. I don't tend to use a huge number of weapons, but I do like swapping between them to sort of mix things up and keep things fresh. Next we have my Goblin build, which is horrendous. It's a level 80 plus 17 plus 7 build because I accidentally upgraded one tier too much. You can see that I started as a Confessor, for some goddamn reason. I've built around Radagon Soreseal to get me to 40 Vigor, but I'm really pushing the bounds on where it will be useful at all. Since this build is otherwise mostly for messing around, I've made it an average strength build with just a little bit of faith, and just enough endurance to run away for extended periods after throwing poop at people, which I have in quantity. Usually I roll around with something like this with the Concealing Veil and the Host's Trick Mirror just so I can sneak around being all nimbly-bimbly, and these two are here, mostly to give me the stats that I lack because this is a shit build. But also just to make sure that I have just enough health to survive that initial moment after I have hurled the feces and pissed people off. And it works for its intended purpose, but that purpose is not winning. Next we have my level 25 plus 3, or plus 0, fully outfitted for the purpose of both fair play and anti-twinkage. As you can see here, I've got a variety of other things that I can pull out if people start getting stupid, but the rest of this is entirely fair game. You can find basically all of this in Limgrave, or in Castle Stormvale itself. And if someone decides to pull out an over-leveled Phantom, I've always got the Lightning Claymore over here to start making things more interesting. But otherwise, this is a fairly squishy build. There is nothing really complicated about this one. Whatever I didn't need for my minimum endurance and strength and that requirements, I simply dumped into Vigor. Vigor was the priority here, and that is why I managed to have 1000 strength at level 25, which is the main advantage of this character. The poise isn't anything to write home about. I think I meet one breakpoint, but not really for anything meaningful. That's pretty much all there is to this one. The rest is drip. Next we have my newest build, the Academy Dropout build. This is a sort of toned down version of Drunk Souls' Magic Knight build. The stats are mostly the same apart from the 20 levels that I've had to remove to keep myself at level 80, and those would be from Mind and Endurance. I've kept those at the absolute minimum that I need. For equipment, I've got both Kari and Night Swords. They do an obscene amount of damage. But I have mixed up my fashion for something that will just meet me that 80 poise, the same as what Drunk has, but in a slightly different fashion way. For talismans, because of my lesser endurance, I am locked into using the Great Jars. That is just required. Erdtree's Favour is also usually required, though I can wield some things without it. Bullgoats is required to get me to that level 80 breakpoint, and usually I have the Radagon icon there just to give me that extra time on the Kari and Piercer, because that's a roll catch, but that is not quite. So they make a big difference to each other. Otherwise, there's nothing about this build, I don't think, that you won't find in Drunk Souls' build video itself. I do have a slight different preference of spells for the moment. I really enjoy the Gavel of Heimer, and I'm trying to work Eternal Darkness in for my counter mage builds, but I'm still playing around with that, if I'm perfectly honest. Otherwise, I am having great fun with this build. It's very versatile. It is a little finicky, in the sense that juggling spells is something that I haven't really had much experience in, but it is very robust in the circumstances that it can deal with. And finally, we have my level 150. It's obviously plus 25, plus 10. This is the character I finished the game with. It's a completely standard fat meta strength build at level 150. It meets nearly all of the basic breaking points that you'd want, and it has just enough dexterity to let me use a heavy thrusting sword. Otherwise, it is completely uncomplicated. I have Bestial Vitality and a couple of other beast incantations slotted up for if I just want to quickly switch to the... where is it? Switch to the Two Fingers heirloom, which obviously allows me to actually cast these things. Because I don't use them in combat, I can easily just go back and reset the build to something else and keep the regeneration on. So using those heirlooms is a really nice way of giving yourself a bit of versatility even when you're locked into much bigger things. Otherwise, this is probably the least complicated of all of my builds. It's basically exactly the same as my level 80 strength build, except that I'm free to use more talismans and I have a higher carry capacity. That's basically it. I hope at least some of you got something out of that. The builds aren't anything special. Most of them are quite standard or just taken from other people who have done them slightly better. But for those people who are asking, I hope this has answered your questions. And I will try and keep up with any future builds that I make and put out another of these videos if I make any more. So, happy hunting, I guess.